Okay, so I keep seeing people ask why there's a shortage of goods and why the cost of the goods are increasing. And with that, I decided to make a video about what exactly goes into how goods are produced. The steps in production between raw materials and a finished product are referred to as a supply chain. That includes the procurement of materials, transporting materials, the manufacturing process, which might involve more than one location, transportation to the retail, and then to the finished consumer. Now, with some industries and some types of products, you'll have subcomponents for it that are made in an outside business. That's also part of the supply chain. An example of that would be aircraft or vehicles or electronics where they rely on microchips for their electronics. Well, right now there's a shortage of microchips, so that's going to affect the availability of aircraft and vehicles for sale. Now, some of the things that people don't take into account when it comes to availability of products is that in order for there to be products to sell, the products have to have been made. In the instance of right now, where we had the shutdowns for all of last year with the pandemic, your retail store might have been opened, it might have been considered an essential business, but that doesn't mean every step ahead of it in the chain was also considered essential. Take for example lumber from a home improvement store. The home improvement store might have been essential and been opened. The trucking to get the goods from the mill to the home improvement store might have been open. And let's say the lumber mill was open. That doesn't mean that the trucking from the logging site to the mill wasn't affected. If the logging site wasn't considered an essential business and was shut down, then there was no logs to be hauled over to the mill. That means that your workers here at the raw material logging site were likely furloughed. And then with less goods to ship from the logging site to the mill, your first stage transport drivers would have also been furloughed. Now, without those goods, that means that, or without those materials, there weren't going to be goods coming out of the mill because don't have anything to turn into product. Now, as far as shortages go, you're still having consumption past that point. And it's not something as easy as turning a light switch on to resume manufacturing when it depends on these outside influences. The furloughed workers from the lumber mill, or not from the lumber mill, from the logging site and from the transport company might have got jobs elsewhere. And both of those require specific experience and or licensing to be able to do. So they would have had to find new workers to be able to fill those roles. Now, what effect that has on cost of goods is a supply and demand issue, because as the demand goes up on the products, the supply reduces. You might think, well, why don't they just make a bunch of it ahead of time? And the reason for that is because the way that our system is currently set up, a company that has inventory of products sitting on their shelves gets taxed on the product that is on their shelves. So what they do is they produce goods to order. There's a little bit of forecast in that, but for the most part, say they'll make 500 boards, and when 400 of those 500 boards have been sold, they'll take and start making another 400 or 500 to replenish that inventory. That way, they're not paying out the nose for just having stuff sitting around on shelves. When you're looking at the cost of goods, a finished product, there's a number of factors that go into it. You've got the cost of your raw materials, cost of your labor, the cost of transporting everything through all the stages. You've got any outside processing. So say, for example, you've got a piece of wood that's going to get laminated and it's going to go to an outside company to get laminated. That would be referred to as an outside process. And the cost of that can vary depending on the factors that the outside processing company is facing, with cost of supplies and cost of labor and their utilities. Now, aside from that, you have the cost of your company's utilities, so your cost of electricity, cost of equipment maintenance, cost of your support staff, the cost of just keeping everything operating. You've also got your business costs that a percentage of gets taken into account in the cost of a product. Take, for example, the cost of the building. If real estate goes up, property taxes go up. That means the cost of having your shop open in that building goes up. That's going to have a trickle-down effect. Increased wages for workers will have a trickle-down effect. Now, with transportation, that uses fuel. The cost of fuel is going to have a direct impact on that. The more expensive fuel is, the more expensive it is to get materials, the more expensive it is to transport stuff between your raw material manufacturers and your own manufacturing facility, plus going out from there to retail facilities. Now, you can look at something, for example, say a wooden bookshelf. A wooden bookshelf might be a relatively simple thing, but there's still a number of factors that go into it that will affect the cost of that bookshelf. And you've got wood stain, you've got boards that come from the raw material, you've got hardware like screws, and you've got bracketry. The cost and availability of any of these components are going to dictate how much that bookshelf costs to get out, and also the volume that you can get that bookshelf out at. If you look at last year with the pandemic, where a lot of stuff shut down, there's a huge issue with the availability of goods. Now, there's also other impacts with the cost of the goods because of having to pay workers more to have them on site, increased costs for, say, your protective equipment and all of the safety regulations that got put in place. So, anyways, thanks for listening to my 2 cents on what happened with this stuff.